Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 10 of Leverage Redemption. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So obviously this episode is about taking down Bronwyn. She's a former actress who basically went off and started a company, but this company basically sells kind of like things that she claims will help like heal people medically, but the fact of the matter is it's just kind of like BS that like is pretty useful. Some of it turns out to actually be harmful, but it's basically tricking people into using her product and not actually getting the actual like medicine that they should be. Like, for example, the person who introduced her to this, her name is Beth. She's an actual doctor. Her sister Julie wasn't getting the actual treatments that she was supposed to be getting because of all of this. So, and it's interesting because Harry, obviously because he's the quote-unquote evil lawyer that he was and still knows the tricks and the trades, is able to say like, just because like this treatment stuff is considered food, so it gets treated differently than drugs. So it's like the drugs have to be proven first, food can be proven after the fact, or it was something of that nature. So now obviously you have Sophie kind of taking this job personally, even though she claims like, no, it has nothing to do with that. But Bronwyn gets under her skin because for her, it's like Bronwyn could be such a good con woman if she used her powers for good, but she uses them for pure evil. Because Sophie even explains it later on, like the stark difference between them. She's like, yes, I've stolen, like I've used a lot of these same tactics, but she's like, my conning, I never hurt people in the process, which I brought up last episode. That is something she wondered about, like some of the people she did business with and the money and stuff like that. Like where that could have gone, like that was a concern for her in like one episode, but because I think she had never really given it much thought before. But now it's like a situation of, but still it's like I've never actively done something that I know was hurting people and didn't care. Like she would steal money and like diamonds and stuff like that, like and paintings, treasures, never anything that would be in a situation where it's like it's actually hurting people and she doesn't care. Because the thing is, Bronwyn is tied up with because she actually, because of her face and name recognition, she was actually able to help a woman named Melanie who actually has a PhD, and they end up she has like the medical know-how to make everything Bronwyn say sounds legitimate. So, but so that's the interesting and complicated thing, because even like immediately Brianna is like kind of feeling sympathetic for Melanie, because even you will, because you're like, okay, Melanie doesn't seem like she's too okay with it, but the fact is that she's going along with it so far, because she even says it later on, or like, right, they started off with the best of intentions of like, they were actually helping people at the beginning, and then it kind of went to the wayside. But Bronwyn's doesn't care about treating people. So initially the whole thing is about just like taking Bronwyn's company down, like kind of destroying her reputation in the process. So I love the whole like Hank and the bees situation. But then you have her call an audible that Sophie called an audible essentially because she found out about Bronwyn wanting to do with this like Bitcoin guy Chad. And so that ends up being Sophie planning on using this situation to kind of, get even bigger. So I even love Elliot getting her to shake his hand with the honey and everything, like covering his hand. But, because I also thought was kind of an interesting thing, and I love how they kind of made this come full circle at the end, was Harry originally had reluctancy for this case because he was like, yeah, he feels bad for these people, but they did willingly take all this stuff. But then Brianna brought up the whole rabbit hole thing of like, right, search engines are about what is getting the most attention, not necessarily what's the most accurate. So all Bronwyn has to do is set up stuff that like all these pages will link back to her company. At the end of the day, it's like you'll fall deeper. Yeah, even if you try to do the actual research, it will all pinpoint you back to this. So you just keep going down a rabbit hole. So I thought that was kind of fascinating, and just how that ended up being an element that it kept implementing throughout the episode is the rabbit hole situation. So, because obviously they try to they begin it with like viral campaigning and stuff like that. I even love Sophie being like, privacy is dead, and it's like Brianna's like, yeah, my generation doesn't even know what that means anymore. It's like, yeah, that's a sad truth of just kind of like, yeah, we take for granted like what we put online and stuff like that. So I even love Sophie does bring up a point. She's like, oh, how much is like this campaign calls? And it's like it was like 200 a pop or something like that is what Brianna was saying with like when they were like viral campaigning H. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm sure like they've all got like a large stockpile. I'm sure, well, because I'm sure Leverage found the company as a whole has like back money that they use to complete their operations, because they never really talk about it too much, but it's like I mean, a lot of times they do like front their own money for some of these operations. So that definitely came up in the original series sometimes, where it's like, right, like how much money does everyone have on them? Like there was the episode where they were, it was in season 2 in the bar. It's like, how much money are we going to, because they were going toe to toe with like the Irish mob at that time. So it's like, how much money do we have on stacks? So like everyone gathered up all their cash and got it to Nate. It's like, no, it doesn't matter about how much I'm winning. It just comes down to how much I'm losing, type of situation. So it's interesting, just kind of to think about that. Like, right, obviously they're on a larger scale, but a lot of the money they set aside money for operations like that. But it's just fascinating, because I think you don't think about like, yeah, a lot of this does cost time. And when Brianna lost like 5 nights of sleep, like working on everything, specifically working on everything, and it's just like you see her like partway through conversations later on, just like laying her heads down, and then like Sophie's just like, wake up, we got to get on top of this, like work on that like backup virus thingy. But I love that, because initially, like I said, it was about stealing basically her company, but like Sophie had called the audible and ended up forming a partnership. And then like obviously Bronwyn goes like live and stuff about like the bees and stuff like that, but then they add their they do their smear campaign of just like, oh, Hank getting arrested, and then like Parker being like, oh, I'm disconnected to my eye, and she has this, like, she uncovers her eyes and she's like, my modeling career is over. I was like, I love it so much. But despite everything, Bronwyn is really good at what she does, so she immediately pivots. Once again, it's like, if she was a con artist for good, like, think about what she could do. The fact of the matter is, she pivots and tries to spin it to be like, oh, like, the bee venom itself, that's what we're going to be selling. It does great stuff. Ha ha ha, blah. So it's like, right. So that kind of failed, so they had to have a different approach. So they're basically going to make Chad and Bronwyn get away from each other. So make Chad think that he's being investigated by the FBI, because then it becomes like a thing of like, it's like, oh, he'll notice that Harry's cover, like every time you go down that rabbit hole that Brianna created, it's like, wow, you're only at this job for 6 months. You're only at this job for 6 months, and start slowly seeing that like, oh, it's a cover up. And so that kind of starts getting him a little nervous. And obviously Sophie, making sure to push Bronwyn, in the grand scheme of things, trying to like justify it by being like, oh, like, it's like, I'm an actress, so she knew exactly where because there is a lot of similarities between her and Bronwyn. I mean, we know Sophie stepped away from the grifting. Whether she stepped away from the actressing or not, I don't think that came up much during the first season, whether or not she stepped away from that, but it's still inside of her. So she knew exactly, because she's good at what she does, so she knows what to kind of poke at when it comes to Bronwyn. But I wonder, is that because like she knows her own weaknesses enough, knowing what to say that would be used to sway her? Because I think she does see a lot of, like, she sees like, oh, Bronwyn was an actress, and also she's a con artist, and I'm both of those as well, so maybe it was almost a little insight into like Sophie going toe to toe with essentially an evil version of herself, so I think that was fascinating. But she was, because like even Bronwyn was kind of like, yeah, like Melanie's kind of got her conscience and everything, and then like that kind of like screws up like how like full throttle they can go a lot of times. So she's more inclined to work with Sophie. But at the same time, I found it fascinating that once again that Brianna felt for Melanie, and then obviously Melanie shows off the different objects, and I love that we cut into the room with Parker while like Melanie's explaining that like thing, and it's just kind of like, and she flips it upside down. It's like, and you're supposed to use it for an hour. I'm like, is that? I interpret it as like they cut away from him. Like, is that supposed to be like a sex thing you stuff inside yourself, like not necessarily meant for sex, but it's meant to like rejuvenate below the waist type of situation. And I was like, because the entire time I'm thinking about it, I'm like, is this supposed to be like a parody on like a certain actress who, you know, I don't want to smear anyone's name, but there's a certain actress who has a company that does similar things. I don't think she goes to the extent that, like, obviously Bronwyn goes. Bronwyn goes to this very extreme, but, like, I think this is supposed to be, like, the extremist version of a real-life thing. So that's why I'm like, is that supposed to be, like, a little commentary on that as well? That's what immediately comes to my mind. It feels like a blatant commentary, but, like I said, not trying to drag anyone's name through the mug, but I'm thinking, if you know, you know. If you don't, I don't know. But it reminded me of that. That's all. I just thought that was kind of fascinating. But, Brianna was able to, like, tell her, like, right, like, you're a good person. Bronwyn isn't. I mean, that's what kind of attracted, you know, my boss to your boss. And it's like, wait, it's like Doris undercover or something? It's like, yeah, like, maybe take a few days off. And she's like, thanks. You're the only person, because she was telling, Melanie, like, Bronwyn isn't a good friend. Like, sometimes you just have to be a good friend to yourself. And then ultimately Melanie's like, yeah, thanks. Sadly, she ended up calling Bronwyn. They figured as much, but Brianna was hoping that she was right about Melanie in it. But it's like, no, despite everything, she's caught in this toxic friendship and everything. Because at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, they might be doing some kind of like shady stuff now, but it's still like, I think it's like once you're kind of in this web of things, you're just not willing to see someone for the way they are. Because it's like, yeah, bad friend or not, it's like she has been a friend. So I thought it was interesting too, the conversation, like, because Brianna's like, do you ever like had a friend realize like, oh wait, this whole friendship is just someone using you, and then, or like you see it from the outside and you wish someone could, you know. And then for Parker, it's like, yeah, I've never had any friends. She's like, well, until I met your brother. And then like Elliot and Sophie, but then like, no, we're like family now, so like it, you know, they're not friends. She's like, well, then there's Peggy and Hurley, but they're my friends, but like they would never hurt me, which I was like, that's really sweet. Because first and foremost, I love the fact is obviously you and Peggy are still friends after all these years. I'm like, that's heartwarming to know. I'm curious, does Parker still think, yeah, she's Alice's best friend? It's like, no, you're Alice. You know, I wonder if that's still a stipulation and a thing. But I love that. But what clicked in my head too was like, I was like, oh yeah, it's funny you would mention both of them, because it's like it's nice to know that you're still tight with them. But Hurley, I was like, oh yeah, the last time we saw Hurley, like him and Peggy were in the same episode. I was like, right, I forget. Well, technically the same episode, but I was like, right, they actually got together. So I'm assuming the fact that she mentioned them specifically, I'm like, they're probably still together. They probably like got married or whatever. I was like, I can only infer that just because they both got referenced. But if you're, once again, I had the benefit of having currently rewatched the series before, rewatched the entire original show before watching this. But the last time Hurley was in the series, it was that episode where basically Team Leverage, there was like the girls' night, so like Sophie, Tara, and Parker like were on their misadventures, and then like the boys had theirs like the next episode, because the episodes were like filmed back to back, and they were actually like I said, they were the same night. It's just two sides of the same coin, where like Nate, Elliot, and Hardison had their own night, and Parker's night dealt with Peggy, and then like Hurley's night, then Hardison's night and stuff dealt with like, well, more so Nate's side, night dealt with Hurley. But then eventually like Hurley and Peggy met each other at the end of the episode, and I think, you know, sparks were flown at like, well, sparks started flying at the end of that episode. So that's what kind of made me think like, oh yeah, I forgot for a second that they potentially are together now. So that's it. I just thought that was really sweet. But even Brianna being like, yeah, you not having friends might have actually saved you a lot of pain, and it's like, maybe. It's like, but I mean, having no friends led to a whole long list of issues and stuff like that for Parker being who she is. I mean, there was even a thing at the beginning. It's like, oh, Parker, like she's putting like she's controlling an operation between like the Korean branch and like the Nigerian branch of Leverage, and it's like. And Brianna's like, what's with the knives? And he's like, I don't know, maybe it has something to do with context. Like, I don't know. It's Parker. It's like, once again, that's always going to be the thing of, I don't know, it's Parker. You know, it's like, you can never, like, even after all these years, it's still like, I can't decipher that woman. She's an enigma. But nevertheless, I went on a huge tangent, but Bronwyn ended up confronting Sophie, and is like, right, like, Chad is going down for money laundering. And so the moment they get brought in by, I was like, I think how you cover up the fact is you just like jack someone off the street publicly. Ivor like had a gun in hand, you know? And so ultimately they end up getting taken to his office, and it's like, he's just like, and I love Chad just being like, I'm so upset I have to kill you. I mean, granted, I'm not going to have to kill you. Ivor's going to kill you, but still, this sucks. But then, like, it's because Bronwyn tried to be like, no, I had no idea. He's like, you lie for a living. Like, why would I believe you? And then Sophie starts laughing. It's like, what's so funny? It's like, okay, actually, I'm not an FBI agent. I'm actually a grifter. I was actually coming after Bronwyn, but then you flaunt that $40 million in front of us. Like, how can I not? He's like, honestly, I believe that. It's like, that's the funny thing, because she is an honest, well, I was about to say the term honest thief. It's like, yeah. It's kind of funny to use that term. No, just because, once again, that's what, Nate tried to be an honest thief. Then he tried to be he was a drunk thief. Then he tried to be an honest, sober thief. And it's like, try to find some middle ground. That was always his struggle. Regardless. At the same time, it's like, right, you still need her alive, so that's why you're not going to kill us. Because, yes, despite all this other stuff being fabricated, Bronwyn's like, Because that was the thing of just how scummy Chad and Bronwyn are. It's like, Chad's like, oh, I don't care about this. He's like, all that data, we could sell them, blah, 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 blah. We could use their data to, like, sell them stuff. It's like, they went super, like, evil about how they're doing this. Even, like, Sophie was looking like, oh, my God, you guys are terrible human beings. And Bronwyn's all about it. And then she says a line of, like, yeah, she's like me. I see a lot of myself in Doris. I'm sure that kind of got under Sophie's skin even more. But regardless, that this was all about the people's information that Bronwyn had gathered. It was still worth millions in itself. So Melanie downloaded it. Luckily, Elliot was able there to show up to help. Went toe to toe with Ivor, and watch out for the bees and that object. And then like she tosses it to Elliot to knock him out. And it's like, what is this even for? It's like, Elliot, you don't want to know. But luckily they got out of there, and Harry shows up to kind of like hand it over, but it's like, oh, like I can just kill you all. He's like, actually, you can't, after he verified it, because you have Sophie throwing her phone, and it's like, yep, it's an EMP, and he has the dead man switch. You kill him, he releases it, all that money goes. She's like, he's like, it's 40 million. She's like, yeah, it's 40 million, but it's not my 40 million. So they're able to go, but it's also like, Bronwyn, you're going to need to go into witness protection because he's going to come after you. It's like, but the EMP was fake and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, but still he's going to come after us now at this point in time. And it also turns out that the moment he looked at Bronwyn's list, the virus that Brianna had made got used, and it's like, he's like, I implanted the virus, because the problem is he was laundering money for a lot of scary people, which I'm wondering if those scary people are going to come back up later on in the season or not. Maybe not, we'll see. But Bronwyn is in witness protection. Elliot talks about his Marshall friend helping out. I'm like, okay, wink wink, nudge nudge. It's like, cool. I wonder if we're going to see her anymore throughout this season or not. So there's that angle. But Melanie and Beth do come together. They're going to start a company, because this time, yeah, Melanie might have like not have been actually able to help people, but anytime she was keeping a lookout for stuff, even if her and Bronwyn never used it, she was still researching like stuff that could help out. So her and Beth are going to help, and for, Melanie, this is her way to kind of make up for the past. And so I love, like, Brianna being like, oh yeah, made, super friends, kind of, and they're going to start a company like you guys. It's like, oh no, we didn't start a company because we were friends. He's like, yeah, I didn't like them in the first year. And then Parker's like, yeah, and I didn't even know his name until after we broke up, the first time. And it's like, he's like, no, that's stupid. She said my name all the time. It's like, oh yeah, but like after people said it, and then I'd be like, oh right, his name's Elliot, because I didn't remember. He was like, Parker. He's like, that's messed up. He's like, you know what? I'm not coming back. And she's like, yeah, he's coming back. Oh, he's totally coming back. I love that. That was because I was like, that's actually, I'm actually legitimately, I kind of want to go back and be like, did she actually only ever say Elliot's name after someone had already said Elliot that first year or something? Like during because I'm assuming like she's referencing season 1 is what she's talking about. So I really like that, like when they went their separate ways then. But I'm like, I like that so much, dude. That's just like a nice little thing. But at the end, it's like, you were able to save Melanie at the end. It's like, yeah, like, no, she was on the verge of saving herself. She just needed a little push, like off a building. And it's like, oh, Hardison warned me about that. Please don't push me off no building. You want to be friends or not? And she's like, no, it's just like not off a building. Because it's like all the times Hardison was pushed off. But I love that, like, they are giving her some training because, like, it's like, they like left her harnessed up and she's like, okay, you guys gonna let me down? All right, bring me a chalupa. You know how I like it, and a juice. I think that was this episode. I thought that was pretty neat. It's just like, yeah. Because even Parker was telling Brianna it's not bad that she wanted to save someone. It's like, yeah, you doing what you do, like Hardison would have done the same thing. So it's like, don't look at it as like a negative thing. But it was able to work out in the end. You were able to help, like, kind of get. Melanie already did have a conscience to some extent. She just needed a nudge in the right direction to kind of finally break free from the whole Bronwyn like grasp and just kind of realize, like, right, I can't keep doing this. I am hurting people. I'm contributing to hurting people. So. But also at the very end, I thought was fascinating the whole conversation between Harry and Sophie. And he was like, yeah, but he's like, I learned the distinct, he's like, I do kind of go back on not wanting to take this job. But now he's like, I also recognize like the distinct differences between you and Bronwyn. For Bronwyn, she does what she does because it's easy. You do what you do and the way you do it because it's hard. And he's like, that in itself is the stark difference between the two of you. Even though there are similarities, that's the biggest glaring difference. But then he also talks about, like, for him, he used to think what he did was hard, but then he looks back in life and realizes, like, right, like, all that lawyering, like, all the evil lawyering stuff I did, like he's like, no, those were easy because I never chose a battle I could lose. And he's like, but the hard battle that I ended up losing was my marriage as well as my relationship with my daughter. And he was like, in his mind back then, he had the two conflated, thinking like, oh, like what he was doing as a lawyer was hard, and like his family situation. I was like, no, that's like he conflated the two, and I thought that was such an interesting perspective on things. And then Sophie's like, promise me, Mr. Wilson, when you leave, and you will eventually leave, that you will do something good afterwards. And Harry's like, I promise, So I think that's fascinating because I guess it's kind of like, I don't know whether she's talking about like whether that's like a at the end of this series type of thing or at the end of the season, like maybe he's only going to be like a season character or like maybe like, but it's like I guess it's like whenever you do eventually leave, like it could be a setup thing of like maybe he'll leave at the end of the season, but maybe he'll come back, like maybe that's what that's kind of inferring. Like I said, like we haven't really touched. It gets brought up in the background, but Leverage is an international operation now with different teams around the world. So we dabble in that a little bit here and there, like I said, in the background, but I wonder will it ever be anything in like the forefront, meeting other members from other teams and collaborating with other teams and stuff like that. So I'm curious about how that'll potential play out in the future. Also, side note, Bronwyn, kind of like, oh, like you look like that actress. It's like Bronwyn. It's just like Bronwyn Lark. They're like, no, Bronwyn Stark. Yeah. Like, oh, they would know your name better than you. And it's like, obviously, like, she's kind of in witness protection, obscurity, and to hear what people had to say about her, it's like, yeah, oh, see that last movie version? Oh, horrible. It's like, oh, gut-wrenching, but it's also like, well, you kind of deserve it. You're kind of a terrible person, so fall back into obscurity and just hear what people really thought about you, It's like, that's kind of sad, but like I said, a really, really interesting episode. I'm really excited to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.